What was the original idea behind like us making it? And obviously, if there's like, if a question's asked in chat, or if there's something where like, oh, I don't know if Morellis wants us talking about that, like you don't have to say it, but like,
yeah,
from wherever's earliest that you're comfortable being like, yeah, this is when it started.
Oh, I'm comfortable going all the way back. I think the transparency. If I was a player, I would appreciate kind of knowing where it all started. So so each champ designer, I think, takes a different approach when it comes to making a champion, and I think that's great. And I think that Riot values that, and I think that League of Legends is a better game because we have different champion designers with different tastes and different ways of thinking about the game. And so the way I really think about making a champion, and some other champion designers too as well, is I need a character, right? Like I can't just be like, here's a mechanic, and now I'm gonna take this really fucking cool mechanic, and then I'm gonna build on top of that and build outwards, and then we're gonna make a sweet character that makes that mechanic. I'd say like Jeevan is really good at this.
Yeah, that's a Jeevan for sure. Riot Jag, for those who are wondering.
Totally. He's going to be like, I'm going to change League of Legends with this mechanic. It's going to be something you've never experienced, and you play it, and like there's not even like thematics there yet, and you're like, holy shit, I need to play this. And then he works with a team to make a character that fits, that experience. I'm the opposite. I need a character, and I need to say, this is the character. What do they do in League of Legends? I think August is the same. Like Senna was very similar. He's like, we're going to start with Senna. What does Senna do in League of Legends, as opposed to starting with a mechanic? And so because of that, I'm like, okay, cool. I know that I need a character to do my best work. What character could we possibly make? And I kind of just like took the initiative a little bit here and was like digging through lore and thinking about, the game and what was available. And this thing started going through my head, and we talked about this as well, which is, and other champ designers have brought this up in the past, which is like, hey, Yasuo's just played so fucking much, right? It's like, it's insane. It's like no other game has this phenomenon where you could play 140 something characters, but like 90% of games has one of the characters in it. It's just nuts. And so I was thinking about that, and like, kind of, why is that? And I was thinking about, hey, maybe we need to start like an opportunity, a way to start thinking about a champion is, let's not try and look for like something super brand new. Let's look at something that did really, really, really well, that is like pointing to we're not giving players enough of this, right? Like imagine, August used this as an example in the past. I think it's great. Imagine 80 carries didn't exist. You had one ADC in the game, right? It's like you just have Jinx. She's the only ADC in the game. And it's like, yeah, you know what? She's probably going to be in 90% of games, because that play style, you can only get it from her, and it's so unique, and like auto attacking people to death, and like being like this late game carry, and like people protecting you early to turn into this monster, right? It's like, wow, that's such an awesome experience. It's crazy that you can only get that on Jinx, right? With our auto attack system or whatever. And so if we only had one Jinx, maybe the goal would be find another ADC, right? Let's make another ADC. And so it's like, okay, and that's clearly true. There can be a lot of ADCs, which we've proven and we've made, and our players love it. And so maybe there's something about Yasuo that is like a unique class that we just haven't defined yet. That's like, oh, okay, maybe there needs to be 5 Yasuos. There's something about him that our players really, really like. So let's try and figure that out and try and make more characters like him.
Yeah. And I was going to say some additional like data context behind this. This one was really interesting because I remember there were independent channels, because I know you'd come up with this, and previously I had pitched a similar thing. I didn't pitch like a character, but I literally just told Morellis, I was like, hey, you should literally just make like the joke I used to make in Champions Pit, and I think you'd heard me say this before. I used to always joke that I was like, hey, could you guys just make Yasuo, but just make him do magic damage and just release as another champion? It was magic damage Yasuo. And the reason being was because it was like, yeah, because Yasuo's played so much. One thing that might be hard actually for some players to get when you're like oh, like, we'd make like 3 or 4 Yasuo or something. North American players are the most critical of Yasuo. You guys hate him the most. You still play him a lot, but like the difference between how North American players versus players in China, Korea, Vietnam, it's especially the Western players. So EU West and then especially NA are like really critical. And everyone always memes like, why'd you mention Vietnam? Well, because there's more players in Vietnam than in North America. Like that server's massive. They all really like Yasuo. We've talked about this before. There's literally something that, and I'm talking to Reeve, who we were mentioning. That's Ryan Morellis, who's the head of Champions team. I'm the one presenting him all this champion data, and all the time I have to edit the charts because of the Yasuo horizon. Which is basically like Yasuo's play rate is so much that like it skews the graph, right? And like you've seen those graphs, right, Fuller? With like
you literally can't read them. If you put the data the way it should be, it's just you see Yasuo up on the top, and then this solid bar of color at the bottom. That's every other champion.
Right. And the other thing, I don't even know if I like would have like expressed to you or even like explain this to people in chat. Like depending on the region, you can take the bottom 50 champions, the bottom 50 play rate champions in league, combine them all, and they still don't have as much play rate as Yasuo. That is insane. And then I think that speaks to that point that Fuller just had, which is like, hey, what if there's like, like that's an entire class of champions, you could argue. There are entire classes of champions, maybe not like as big of a class as say supports or tanks, although maybe tanks actually. I bet you in some regions, if you combine the tank play rate, Yasuo is higher than tank player. But
I would not be surprised.
But regardless, if you go into like subclasses like artillery mage or like vanguard or whatever our subclasses are, Yasuo as an individual champion easily has more play rate than the entire subclass, right? And I think that that's why it was really cool. Where it's like, hey, like what if we make another Yasuo like champion?
Totally. And so I was thinking about these two things, both trying to find a character and thinking about, hey, maybe Yasuo is a class of characters that we need more of. And Yone just seemed like so ridiculously obvious at that point. I'm like, oh, we have this character that's called out by name and lore. He's related to Yasuo, so that, we kind of, if for example, let's say we're wrong about the gameplay thing, right? Let's just say people like Yasuo because he's a samurai, right? And he's like a really well done samurai, and that carries most of his weight. It's like, okay, cool. We'll be in the same boat as
same area, yeah.
Just to like, figure out whether or not that's the case. But anyway, so I have this pitch ready, and I'm like, okay, I think we should make Yone. And so I go to Reeve, Ryan Morales, you mentioned before, and it was hilarious actually how this meeting went. I was like super excited, so I put a prototype kit in over the weekend. I made a deck with like 30 slides. We set aside some time.
I remember this deck too. I was so hyped when you showed me this.
Yeah, and so we sit down in the meeting, and he's like, all right, cool, what do you want to talk about? I'm like, okay, I want to pitch a champion. And he's like, okay, let's do it. And I go to the first slide, and I basically explain what I just explained, right? I'm like, hey, we should be looking at our successes to see if there's opportunities there. And he responds to that with, oh yeah, I've been saying we should make Yone for years. And so I skipped past 20 slides, trying to convince him, and get to the part where I'm like, yeah, we should make Yone. And that was it. The meeting was like a minute and a half. And he's like, okay, yeah, you want to make Yone? Sure, get started. So yeah, that's day one Yone, man. That's how it all started.
It's weird because like, having worked with many designers, whether it's, August or Brad, so I guess he's just Riot August now. And then certainly T, and working with other designers, oftentimes like they have a vision of a champion that part of my job is like to suss out if like, bring in actual players and suss out if that's something that's cool. Sometimes we'll even like look into like, oftentimes we look into data and see like, oh, is this like an opportunity space that like we don't have for these characters yet? And I will admit, oftentimes when you go and speak to champion designers, I think a lot of it's in the designer's head where they actually see the vision and they can't quite, you're not going to quite get the vision yet. I do remember with Yone, as soon as you like I literally saw it, I was like, oh, okay, cool, sweet. We're done. Like, ship it. Like, let's go.
Yeah, I remember you came over and I showed you the kit. And you're just like, oh yeah, I get it. We're doing this now. Yeah.
Why? Oh wait, well we're gonna interject with one quick question. People are like, why
Yeah.
Yone and not Yown?
Yeah. So I think that's just because it's how it's pronounced, right? Like when I first started working on it, I wasn't sure what it was either, and I asked Brad, certainly T, and he's like, oh, it's Yone. And then so we had to confirm with IPC, which is like our fantastic group of writers and lore keepers for League, and yeah, that's just that's the
Yeah.
name in the same way that Yasuo is a name as well. It's not something that we made up. It is a name that is kind of a lot more common in Japan, I think. But yeah, and I understand the tendency for English speakers to be like, that's weird, right? Because it's like when you see those letters in laid out in that order, that's not how you would say it. But
I think Yone sounds so much cooler than Yown.
yeah,
I think Yone is so much cooler.
I like Yone a lot. I was very happy when I found out that's how it was pronounced, because it's like, I don't know, it sounds more Ionian, right? It sounds more like the character. So yeah, I'm pretty happy about that.
All right, so character gets approved super fast. You start going about it. What were some of the biggest challenges you had with this character in development?
Dude, the biggest one. So there's two big ones, but the hardest one for me to kind of get over was right when I started. My original pitch was essentially an Echo Fighter. And so
that's right.
It is what you were saying. Hey, maybe we should just put Yasuo in again, and it would be like Ken and Akuma, right? It's like Ryu and Akuma. We have Ryu. Yeah, players love playing Ryu. He's super popular. They want more of it. So let's put Akuma in, right? It's like very similar gameplay, very small changes between their kits, relatively speaking, right, compared to full brand new characters. A thematic that's kind of in the same boat, but takes it a little bit a different direction, maybe a darker direction, and go from there. And I think all of that stuff made sense on paper, and it's really hard for me to say right now that we should never do that, but that type of character is really hard to make. Like,
yeah.
It's like not a lot of people think that that's the best approach, and I empathize with people who feel that way. And so pretty early on, I think we decided, okay, Yone actually has to be his own thing. He has to be a different character. And then so the struggle then became, okay, so we have two goals here, one on the lore side and one on the gameplay side. One is make a character that's unique and different, something League has never seen, which of course is the goal of every champion. But we're also trying to, like I said earlier, capture a possible type of character or character class that might only exist on Yasuo. So which parts of it should we try and replicate, and which parts of it do we make unique? Especially when we don't really know what that class is, we're trying to define it. And so for ADCs, it's super obvious, right? It's like, oh, reliable sustained damage, most likely from range. It's like, okay, cool. You can change how that works in a whole bunch of different ways to make it unique, as we have. But when we're trying to figure out what that is for Yasuo, then that's kind of, and then at the same time trying to make something that's unique, that became kind of really challenging, I think. And then the other side of the gameplay that was really challenging as well is, obviously, certainly T is like a fucking god, right? Like, as much as you want to meme on him or get pissed at the fact that you keep losing to his champions or whatever, he is extraordinarily good at what he does. And so when I'm trying to make a character that is in the same character class as Yasuo but is different, I very often would run into, okay, there is 5 ways that we could achieve this outcome of a mechanic. And we brainstorm them, we list them all out, we pros and cons them, all that type of stuff. Oh, it turns out Brad took the best one and put it on Yasuo. Then we move on to the next mechanic. Oh man, there's only 2 ways that you can really do this thing that we're trying to do. We talk about it a lot, we pros and cons it or whatever. Oh, it turns out Brad took the best one and put it on Yasuo. And then we have, the third mechanic. holy shit, I think there's really only one way that you could do this in League of Legends. Oh, turns out it's on fucking Yasuo. So that was like,
I feel like in a way he made Yasuo like too, and people have criticized Yasuo about this. Sometimes I've even said it about Yasuo, which is like Yasuo as a character is too fun for League of Legends. What he gets to do is like too fun in the game, and arguably you could have made 2 different or 3 different champions from his abilities.
Totally, and no one can blame Brad for doing what he did. But yeah, like sometimes playing Yasuo feels like you're cheating, or you're literally just playing a different game, right?
And that's that's why I love it. So
and that's why players love it, exactly. And so that was kind of the big struggle from the design side. And then on like the story or the lore side, it was kind of a similar thing, but the whole this character was killed by Yasuo, right? Like that was the story, and that, as far as players are concerned, is the end of the story. And like I said, we wanted to expand on that and move League story forward, but be respectful to what that story was and what it meant for Yasuo. And we didn't want to just, erase history or like water down Yasuo because Yone exists. The both of them should be better because each other exists, right? Yasuo should be a better character because Yone exists, and vice versa. And so that was kind of the goal there. The second major hurdle for the Yone project was kind of attachment to a mechanic that we had for a really long time. And now I don't want to get too specific about this because I'll say it's a little political. But we had a mechanic that the team was very polarized about, where some people liked it a lot and some people really didn't like it. And it stuck around for way too long because the people who liked it really liked it.
This was just so I know, this was like it was a mobility one, right?
Yes, yeah. I can talk about the mechanic because I'll explain why it was bad. And so the mechanic was, hey, this guy's a demon hunter. Let's categorize demons as like an actual like type of character or type of action in League of Legends. And so we basically categorize that as like mobile champions, right? It's like, okay, Yone is, from a gameplay standpoint, very good at fighting mobile champions. That he'd be basically like a counter to Akali or Yasuo or whatever. When those champions normally are running circles around people, you could pick Yone to basically not cut them down to size, but say, hey, I'm going to basically match you, and we're going to go at it type of thing. And so the mechanic went through a ton of iterations, but it basically boiled down to, if you ever dashed, Yone basically could dash to you for free and start fighting you. And so that meant every time Yasuo used his E to go through a minion wave, Yone could use his E to catch him, and then Yasuo would dash through another minion, and Yone would dash to him and catch him, and vice versa. It's basically, however mobile you are, I will match it.
I remember playing this with, like, in a lane matchup against a Yasuo, and it just being like, I mean, it did actually change the game to another kind of game. It was just
totally.
It was full on Weeb City, like going nutty. It was silly, but it had merit, right? It was fun. I actually think one of the issues was there was an old version of Yone that I think might have been. There was a version of Yone that I think might have been better than the one you launched live, but I also think it might have been better, as in more fun to play, than live Yasuo. And I think it was probably too much for the game. Like you had too much. Like the person playing it just had too much fun, which meant no one else was having fun.
That kind of was. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward way of putting it, but essentially why we backed away from that model. Not the model I'm talking about, but the model you're talking about, and we can get to that as well. But yeah, so like it was polarizing because it had a lot of good things to it, but here's the thing that sucked the most about it, which was abilities like that, and kind of just abilities in general. Like, there is a reasonable expectation that a player casts their spell that they spend resources on it, they spend a cast time, they spend a cooldown, and that they get something that is beneficial to them, right? Like, you have cast your Lucian E literally 20,000 times in your history playing League of Legends, and now when you cast it and Yone is in the game, you lose the game, right? It's like, literally, if you didn't cast Lucian E, Yone would not have had a chance to dash to you, and he would have been stranded on the other side of the fight and got killed. But because you dashed, he now gets to dash to you and kill you.
The frustration that I remember it seemed similar to, but on a completely different level, was people's frustration when Zoe flashes after picking up your flash.
Totally.
Because it was like, there's this expectation that we've trained in the game where it's like, you need to live and get somewhere else or do something. And sometimes it's not flash, sometimes it's barrier or exhaustion, whatever it is. It's like, I need to use this summoner spell. It's this huge investment for me to live. And Zoe was basically like, hey, I now am like, that's not always your best choice, because if you flash in front of me, I can flash after you. And I think that feels really bad. But one of the key differences is that doesn't occur that much. Flash's cooldown is super long. Like, it's not happening all the time.
Totally.
And we might be able to say that the burden of playing in a game with Zoe is that the burden that Zoe brings to the game, the new decision making you have to make in the game, is knowing how her passive works and knowing that you're going to have to be thoughtful about your summoner spell usage at times. Cool, you make 5 or 6 of those choices throughout the game, maybe even less. But exactly, your point is, if you're Lucian or you're Ezreal or you're Riven, it's like, oh, so much of your identity is based around dashing and movement, and if you always have to think about that, like.
And there's actually 2 other things I want to bring up too. The first one being that when you flash and leave a flash shard on the ground for Zoe to pick up, and she gets a flash, outside of the fact that she gets a little bit of extra damage from casting a summoner spell or whatever, she basically just gets to do exactly what you just did, and that's it, right? You blink 400 units in a direction, she blinks 400 units in a direction. The way this spell had to function was that Yone actually had to get much more out of it, because he was likely in a position where he wasn't threatening you at all, and you need to get into a position where he was threatening you. And so you would dash 400 units to the right to dodge an Ezreal skill shot, and Yone dashes 900 units over a wall to you, and gets to kill you for it. And you're like, whoa, what the fuck? Like, that wasn't even like remotely proportional to what I just did. I think that's one thing that like differentiates the Zoe case versus the Yone case. And then
that brings up some good playtest memories, actually.
Yeah. And the other thing as well is what that basically the play ended up boiling down to was that, once you got good at fighting Yone, the question we were asking, and eventually what ended up getting it overturned, thankfully, was like, once both players are really good at this game, both playing as and playing against, is the end result exciting? Like, is the end result fun and interactive with a lot of choices and a lot of dynamic situations and stuff that people are going to get excited about? No. What it turned into was Lucian doesn't dash. He just goes, if I dash, Yone gets to me and I die, so I won't dash.
Right, which is the antithesis of what you want from these characters, especially in what we call like the weeaboo classics. Like, if you have like a Yasuo versus Zed, like, watch them hit 6 and watch the all-in occur. Like, the Yasuo is dashing everywhere, the Zed's using his shadows, using his ult. God, there was like a really famous clip recently. As much as people like hated like Aurelia and Akali, there's this amazing clip of, I think it was like TF Blade versus someone else, but it was like an Akali versus Aurelia clip where it's like, holy shit, is this League of Legends? Like, they were going all over the place, dashing. Yeah, it was fucking sweet. But yeah, you're right. In a world where it's like the optimal play is, this character with dashes just doesn't dash against Yone, then it becomes kind of dull and defeats the purpose of why we put the character.
For both of you, right? Because it's okay. Well, now Lucian doesn't get to use his dash anymore, and now Yone doesn't get to use his dash, and so you both just sit there doing nothing. And it's like, man, this fucking sucks. Yeah. So thankfully we moved away. The problem was that how long it took to convince people that that's what we should do. And so it consumed a lot of time. Basically, assuming that was our kind of core mechanic.
That was the original sort of like hook of the kit, which was really fucking, and it was really fun. I think that was the problem, was it was really fun, but it wasn't so egregious that like we couldn't just have it in the game.
Exactly. If you just tagline that for players, right? It's like you basically get to use all of the mobility that all of your opponents have. You are as mobile as all of your opponents combined. It's like, pfft, that sounds so fucking sweet, right? But it's like, you know, as what happens with game development, what it looks like on paper isn't always what it turns out to be. And the end result here was, no, not only are you not as mobile as the opposing team doesn't get to have fun either or use any of their mobility spells. And it's like, yeah, this is wrong.
What a great comment. The Cold War of League abilities. I'm not using mine unless you use yours.
Yeah, it was exactly that.